On a rain-slicked street in a struggling southern town, a young black girl rushes home after a long shift, clutching her last few dollars. She spots an elderly white man collapsed beside a broken-down truck, ignored by everyone else. Without a moment's hesitation, she sprints to his aid, offering all she has. What she doesn't know is that this small act of compassion will forever alter her entire future. Before we dive into this remarkable tale, tell us where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and aged timber as the sun fought to pierce through dense clouds, bathing the small town of Millstone, Georgia, in a gentle muted golden-gray glow. Its streets, scarred and mended from years of wear, meandered past collapsing porches, flaking paint and overgrown yards, silent testaments to hardship and forgotten aspirations. On the corner of Maple and 3rd, in a time-worn house with askew shutters and a rusting mailbox clinging precariously, lived Amara Johnson, a 14-year-old whose smile outshone any light left in this tired town. Inside that home, the fragrance of old books and freshly fried cornbread permeated the air, mingling with the faint, persistent aroma of menthol ointment from the bedroom where Grandma Ruth lay, softly coughing into a well-worn handkerchief. Amara moved swiftly through the narrow halls, her old sneakers squeaking on the faded linoleum. She carefully balanced a chipped tray holding a bowl of thin soup and a half-filled glass of tap water. Her arms were slender but strong, her dark curls pulled back with a tattered pink ribbon. Her wide, earnest brown eyes held the wisdom of someone who'd learned too soon that life offered no free passes. After placing the tray gently, Amara kissed her grandmother's forehead, feeling the warmth from her frail body and whispered, "I'll be back soon, Grandma, I promise." She slipped out the door, pulling her second-hand jacket tighter against the cool breeze that swept down the street like a precursor to rain. She had a shift at Mr. Denny's convenience store a few blocks away, and every dollar earned, every crumpled tip stashed in her pocket, meant food on the table or another precious pill from the pharmacy they could barely afford. The neighborhood was a patchwork of fading hopes, kids in threadbare clothes playing with makeshift toys in dusty yards, old men rocking on creaky porches with wary eyes, and mothers dragging weary feet, burdened by grocery bags too heavy for their slight frames. Most people kept their heads down, consumed by their own daily struggles, and smiles were a rare commodity here. Yet somehow Amara carried one everywhere she went, a genuine smile, not a forced, practiced one. It was the kind of smile that could rekindle belief in good things, even if only for a second. She shared her laughter freely, even with strangers. She gave away the broken candy Mr. Denny let her take home, handing them to the small children whose noses were pressed against the store window, yet never had a penny to spend. Just last week she'd given her only sandwich to old Pete, the town drunk, who slumped against the gas station with shaking hands and eyes too exhausted for hope. She hadn't hesitated, hadn't considered how her own stomach would ache hours later when the store closed and dinner would be a glass of water and a dream. The townspeople noticed her, of course, but not always with approval. Some shook their heads, muttering that kindness yielded no good when you yourself had nothing. Others sneered, deeming her foolish, too tender-hearted for a world that devoured girls like her and cast them aside. But Amara? She seemed unbothered. Perhaps, deep within that fierce little heart, she believed that kindness wasn't about receiving something in return. It was about being the single small light in a town that had long forgotten how to gleam. And so, beneath the bruised sky of a weary Georgia afternoon, Amara Johnson hurried down cracked sidewalks, past crooked mailboxes and silent houses, her backpack bouncing, her worn shoes stirring small clouds of dust. She chased a future that so far seemed just out of reach. But still she ran because hope, even its smallest flicker, was a potent force. The storm showed no mercy that night, lashing the town with a relentless fury that transformed streets into rivers and gutters into roaring torrents. Inside Maggie's diner, the old fluorescent lights flickered nervously as if shivering from the cold. Amara sat across from the old man, the dampness seeping into her bones, making her teeth chatter despite the cup of cheap coffee she cradled. She glanced at the clock above the counter, a pang of panic seizing her. Grandma Ruth's medicine, the rent money, the electricity bill, all flashed through her mind like dire warnings on a dark highway. She couldn't afford missteps. She couldn't afford compassion. But here she was, sitting with a stranger, watching him struggle to stay warm, and every fiber of her being knew she couldn't simply walk away. When the waitress slapped the bill down with a grunt, Amara rummaged in her pocket, pulling out every crumpled dollar and coin she possessed. It wasn't enough for the tow, not even close. Her stomach knotted as she grasped what she had to do. Without a word, she grabbed her backpack and stood, the chair scraping loudly across the floor, drawing a few sideways glances. She forced a smile at the old man. "Stay here," she said, her voice steady though her heart pounded. "I'll be back." The rain hammered her as she dashed into the night, her sneakers slipping on the slick pavement, her mind racing faster than her feet. She had one valuable possession. Her phone, a battered old smartphone with a cracked screen and a charger that barely worked. But it was something. At the pawn shop 3 blocks over she could probably get just enough for a tow truck. Maybe. She hated the thought. That phone was her lifeline. For emergencies, for school assignments, for calling Grandma Ruth when she worked late. But now, looking back at the diner's glowing windows where the old man sat huddled and alone, she knew there was no real choice. The pawn shop buzzed with the stale scent of dust and regret. The clerk, a man with greasy hair and a perpetual scowl, barely looked up as she stumbled in, dripping water onto the grimy floor. She slapped the phone onto the counter, gritting her teeth. "How much for it?" she demanded. He squinted at it, mumbled something, then shrugged. $50, he said without sympathy. Amara wanted to scream. 50 wasn't much, nowhere near what she needed, but it was better than nothing. She snatched the money and ran, her lungs burning, the cold slicing into her skin like blades. She flagged down a local tow truck driver, a gruff man whose belly strained against his oil-stained overalls. He grumbled and cursed but eventually agreed to help after she pressed the damp bills into his hand. Every penny she had. They drove back through the flooded streets, the wipers thudding rhythmically against the windshield. By the time they reached Maggie's, the rain had begun to ease, leaving the town drenched and shivering under a bruised sky. Amara burst back into the diner, soaked to the bone, her teeth chattering so hard it hurt. She found the old man still there, staring into his now cold coffee as if wishing to disappear. She tugged at his sleeve and offered a breathless, crooked smile. "The truck's going to get towed," she said, her voice hoarse but bright. The old man looked up, his eyes glistening in a way that had nothing to do with the rain. He opened his mouth to speak but no words came out. Instead he simply nodded, slow and heavy, as if the weight of the world had settled on his shoulders, and maybe, just maybe, Amara had helped lift a piece of it away. When the driver hooked up the old pickup and hauled it onto the truck, Amara stood beside the old man on the sidewalk, her wet jacket clinging to her, her shoes squelching with each step. She should have been exhausted. She should have been furious with herself for sacrificing the little she possessed. But as the truck rumbled away into the night, she felt only a strange, fierce sense of tranquility. The old man turned to her, his voice rough with emotion. "Why'd you do all this, girl? You don't even know me." Amara looked at him. Truly looked at him. Past the wrinkles, the dirt and the tattered clothes, and saw someone left behind by the world just like so many others in Millstone. She shrugged, a small, almost defiant gesture, and said simply, "Because someone's got to start being kind first." The old man gazed at her for a long time, blinking rapidly as if fighting back something profound. He didn't say thank you, he didn't need to. On that broken, rain-slicked street, under a sky still bruised and bleeding light, the words hung between them, unspoken but understood. And somewhere deep inside Amara's shivering body, despite everything she had just lost, a tiny spark of warmth flickered to life and refused to die. The days that followed crawled by, slow and heavy like thick syrup. The storm had passed, but the sky above Millstone remained stubbornly gray, hanging low over the rooftops like an old, tattered blanket refusing to lift. Amara trudged through her routine with an unshakable weariness, feeling the void left by the missing phone, the uncompleted homework, the calls she couldn't make to check on Grandma Ruth during long shifts. She told herself it didn't matter, that it was just a thing, that helping the old man had been worth it. But in the quiet hours before dawn, as she lay awake listening to the leaky faucet drip, drip, drip into the kitchen sink, doubts gnawed at her like rats in the walls. She hadn't seen the old man since that night. He hadn't returned to the diner. He hadn't sent word. Perhaps he was just another transient, and her kindness had been discarded like everything else around here. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that sagged under its own weight, when the world shifted without warning. Amara was stacking dented cans of beans on the high shelves at Mr. Denny's, her arms sore, her stomach rumbling from another skipped lunch, when the crunch of tires on gravel outside caught her ear. She barely glanced up. Probably another delivery, maybe old Mr. Burton and his rusted Chevy. But then the door creaked open and the bell above it gave a sharp, almost alarmed jingle, and suddenly the entire store fell silent. Amara turned, wiping her hands on her jeans, and froze. Parked just outside was a long, gleaming black limousine, its chrome grille glinting like a predator's smile under the subdued light. Standing in the doorway, water dripping from a freshly opened umbrella, was a man she barely recognized at first. The old man from the diner, but utterly transformed. Gone were the torn coat and battered boots. Now he wore a dark, tailored suit that looked more expensive than anything anyone in Millstone had ever seen. His white hair was neatly combed, his posture straight and commanding, his sharp, assessing blue eyes swept the room until they landed squarely on her. For a moment, the whole world seemed to tilt, the cheap fluorescent lights buzzing louder, the smell of stale bread and old mop water thick in her nose. Mr. Denny's mouth hung open, his hand frozen halfway to ringing up a customer's bottle of soda. The few other customers in the store gaped openly, whispering behind cupped hands. The old man, no, not just any old man, stepped forward with slow, deliberate strides that echoed off the scratched tile floor. He stopped in front of Amara, his eyes softening slightly as he looked down at her, and he smiled, a genuine smile, warm and filled with something like pride. "Amara Johnson," he said, his voice deep and steady, the kind of voice accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed. "I've been looking for you." Amara blinked, her throat tightening. "Sir, she started, but the words tangled and died. "My name is Charles Whitmore," he continued, slipping a hand into his jacket pocket and pulling out a slim leather wallet, flashing a card that glinted with the insignia of Whitmore Industries, one of the largest real estate development companies in the entire southeastern United States, a name she'd only ever seen on the news or on dilapidated billboards outside of town. "I'm the owner of the land surrounding this town. I came here quietly to see it for myself, to see the people, the spirit still left behind in these broken streets. I didn't want yes men or fancy tours. I wanted to know if there was anything left worth saving." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, and Amara felt her knees wobble, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Charles Whitmore. The Charles Whitmore had been the old man she helped in the rain, the man nobody else had given a second glance. "And you," he said, his voice lowering so only she could hear, "you were the only one who saw me. Not a paycheck. Not a headline. Just a man who needed help." Amara shook her head, still unable to comprehend. I didn't do it for her." She started, but again he cut her off, this time with a warm, genuine laugh. "I know you didn't. That's why it matters." He turned slightly, gesturing to a man in a gray suit standing just outside the door, who nodded and stepped forward, carrying a thick envelope and a set of keys. Charles took them and pressed them into Amara's trembling hands. "In that envelope," he said, "you'll find a full scholarship to any university you choose, starting with private tutoring to get you there. There's also the deed to a newly renovated home for you and your grandmother, fully furnished, paid in full, and a trust fund to ensure you never have to pawn your phone to help a stranger again." Amara could hardly breathe. Her fingers clutched the keys like a lifeline, the metal cool and real and solid against her skin. She opened her mouth to protest, to say she couldn't accept this, that it was too much, but Charles shook his head, his expression kind but firm. "You earned this, Amara," he said. "Not because you asked, but because you gave when you had nothing left to give." Behind her, Mr. Denny coughed awkwardly, and when she turned she saw tears glistening in the old man's eyes, quickly wiped away with a gruff swipe of his hand. Around the store people were whispering, pointing, their faces split between awe and shame. Shame that they had ignored the old man, shame that it had been Amara, the skinny girl with hand-me-down sneakers and a smile too big for her face, who had shown them all what it meant to be decent. For the first time in what felt like forever, Amara stood tall, the rain outside forgotten, the gray sky breaking open just enough to let a shaft of golden sunlight pour through, warm and blinding and beautiful. Weeks passed and the town of Millstone began to hum with a new kind of energy, a slow rising buzz like the first crackle of a summer storm promising rain after a long drought. Where broken windows once gaped like missing teeth, glass now gleamed clean and strong. The potholes that had jolted every axle and bone were smoothly filled. Yards once overgrown and wild, now wore fresh grass like proud new suits. And laughter, real laughter, started drifting through the air again, carried on warm breezes that smelled of hope. Amara's world transformed too, but not quite as she had expected. The new house was grander than anything she had ever dared to dream of, with a working heater that softly hummed through the cold nights, a roof that didn't leak when it rained, and a rail bed where Grandma Ruth could sleep without coughing herself awake from drafty windows. She still woke some mornings in a panic, heart racing, half thinking it had all been a cruel trick of her mind. But then she would hear the kettle whistling from the kitchen and Grandma's off-key humming, and she knew deep in her bones that it was real. Charles Whitmore didn't vanish after handing over the keys either. True to his word, he kept showing up, sometimes in the big limousine, sometimes on foot, a coffee cup in one hand and a newspaper tucked under his arm. He'd ask about her schoolwork, teasing her about how he expected nothing less than straight A's if he was going to be her personal investor, as he liked to call himself with a wink. He wasn't just rescuing Millstone with his money, he was rescuing it with his presence, reminding the people that their town still mattered, that they still mattered. And Amara? She wasn't just the girl from the old part of town anymore. She became a symbol, a living, breathing reminder that kindness wasn't weakness, that helping someone when you had nothing yourself was the purest kind of strength. The day of the new school's grand opening dawned bright and warm, the kind of perfect spring day that felt like a blessing whispered straight from heaven. The entire town gathered in the freshly paved parking lot, dressed in their best clothes, faces flushed with excitement and disbelief. Banners snapped in the soft breeze, and balloons bobbed against the clear blue sky. Amara stood behind the podium, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the speech she had spent days writing and rewriting, the neat black letters blurring and dancing in front of her eyes. She could see Grandma Ruth sitting in the front row, a bright red hat perched proudly atop her silver curls, waving wildly when their eyes met. She could see Mr. Denny, Mr. Burton, even the grumpy pawn shop clerk, all packed together, waiting, watching. And standing a little apart from the crowd, arms folded across his chest, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth, was Charles Whitmore. Amara took a deep breath, feeling the words settle in her chest like stones finding their rightful place in a riverbed. Her voice, when it came, was small at first, a little shaky, but grew stronger with every word. Kindness, she said, her voice carrying across the silent crowd, costs nothing but gives everything. I didn't know when I helped a stranger that it would change my life. I only knew that it was the right thing to do. We are all pieces of each other's stories. We can be the part that saves someone or the part that lets them drown. I hope we all choose to save. There was a moment of breathless stillness, and then the crowd erupted, clapping and cheering, some whistling through their fingers, others wiping at their eyes with crumpled tissues. Amara smiled wide and unashamed, feeling something burst open inside her chest, something bright and fierce and unstoppable. Later, as the ribbon was cut and the children swarmed into the gleaming new school building, Amara wandered the edge of the crowd, soaking it all in. The laughter, the music, the impossible reality of it all. She felt a tug at her sleeve and looked down to see a little boy, no older than 6, his shoes untied, his face sticky with cotton candy, holding out a melted lollipop toward her with a grin missing 2 front teeth. Without hesitation, Amara knelt down, took the lollipop with exaggerated solemnity and smiled. "Thank you," she said. "You have no idea how much this means." And somewhere nearby, Charles Whitmore laughed, deep and rich, the sound rolling across the parking lot like a promise that better days were just beginning. The town of Millstone had found its light again, and it had started with a girl who had nothing but gave everything. And as long as she was there, that light wasn't going out anytime soon. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.